Why, hello there, old sports. December Holiday, or simply DESS, is going to probably be a very big character in the narrative of Deltarune, and this is despite, by the time of Chapter 5, we don't even have a blatant appearance, and we only have one silhouetted sprite from a flashback to go off of. But, for what DESS lacks in direct appearances, she makes up to with connections and ties to some of the most important characters in the narrative. Now, while Chris is by no means a traditional player character, they are the player character of Deltarune. Even if we technically are playing as the Soul is inhabiting Chris Dreamer. And Chris, as I just said, is part of the Dreamer family. DESS is part of the Holiday family. And we know up to some point in the past, before the game started, both families were not only inseparable, but also one in some ways. The two matriarchs, Carol Holiday and Toriel Dreamer, seem to have the weakest relationship or the weakest connections between the two, out of any pairing we know of between the two families. But from there, things get a lot more interesting. Asgore and Rudy are not only college best friends, but, on top of that, they're probably the reason these two families are so tied together in the first place. And further on, even if Chris and Noelle never had any sort of romantic relationship, and their friendship was just a friendship, the game keeps pointing in this direction that it wasn't just a friendship, even if it wasn't romantic, it was something deeper, something more personal and intimate, even if it wasn't romantic. And even the world and fate itself seems to tie them together in some ways. And then, atop all of that, we have Azriel and December. And while we don't know exactly how much both felt towards each other, we do know for a fact that Azriel was in love with DESS. Now personally, I think the fact that Azriel was the closest with DESS is the reason Azriel himself is being kept so far away from us. Because yes, while Noelle and DESS were sisters and were undeniably close, at the current state in the story, Noelle is really far in her own head and very deeply in denial about some things, and also is probably repressing some stuff, so it would be hard to get any good information out of her. And then, while Chris has also been implied to have a good relationship with DESS before the disappearance, it also kind of shows that we also can see, with our brief glimpses into their psyche, that they're also in denial, and they're also repressing some things. And then on top of that, unlike Noelle, who is kind of just too numb to share anything with us, Chris is actively going out of their way to hide things from us. And considering the fact of how powerful and how far our reach is in this world, the fact that they're doing as well as they are is honestly impressive. So, when Chekhov's Azriel returns to town, I think he would have to be written in a very specific way to not give answers, especially as so much has changed since he's left, probably. Because Rudy is not only sick, but as of Chapter 5, he's either probably in a coma or already just straight up dead. And then Noelle is obviously dealing with all that, regardless of if the weird route has happened or not, because that opens up a whole other can of worms. And then on top of that, Susie is also kind of another piece of this puzzle that's been thrown in, and she's shaken things up a lot, because in a way, Chris was able to kind of avoid Noelle, whether they wanted to or not, but as they've been sticking alongside Susie, and Susie has gotten closer to Noelle, it's a lot harder to keep distance. And again, I feel like that would be something Azriel would have to confront and acknowledge if he were to be an active player in the story at any point. All of that to say that even if DESS doesn't have much concrete info stated or shown about her as of now, that's going to get harder and harder to maintain as the story reaches its climax, especially considering she's almost the center of all these mysteries that are looming in the background of Hometown. So, since we don't have much to go on as of now, Deltarune fans will do what they've always been doing, wildly predicting things. And, of course, this comes back to what will DESS end up doing in the story. And lots of people have a few different answers. And today, I'm here to champion a specific idea about what DESS is doing. In fact, my idea is that DESS isn't doing anything. In fact... Now, I will admit, that is a bit to just drop on you. And depending on how deep in the Deltarune fandom you are, this might not even be an idea that has crossed your mind. So I feel like I do need to justify this a little bit, but I promise I genuinely believe this is the direction the story is going, and if it does not go this way, then you have full rights to make fun of me. Now, I have plenty of reasons why I think this is the case. Some reasons are stronger than others, so I'm generally going to try to start with some of the weaker points and then work my way up to some of the stronger points. Maybe not completely linearly, but I hope you get what I'm trying to get across. Also, I do feel like I kind of need to point out that by this video's very nature, it will be very anti-DESS night, because regardless if you like the theory or not, or feel like it's good writing or not, feels like it has good potential or not, I feel like it's something you kind of have to accept that very widely, the fandom agrees that DESS is the knight. Or at least that's the general consensus. If you were to get a large group of Deltarune fans and ask them who the knight is, I feel like a majority of them would say DESS. So with that being said, any video that is going to be arguing that DESS isn't playing a very active role in the story is inevitably going to have to clash with the ideas that DESS Knight presents, so I don't want to seem like I'm just bullying this specific theory or that I don't like it. I just want to point out that these two theories cannot coexist just by the logic of basic reasoning. And that leads me into my first point, that being that I don't think Toby Fox is just going to do the same thing he did in Undertale, but again. And I usually hate when people bring that up as a point, because I feel like lots of people have these ideas that Deltarune needs to work a certain way, or it needs to follow certain patterns, and people believe that up until those patterns are broken. And that's kind of just a way lots of people think, unfortunately, but I just feel like I need to bring that up. I feel like lots of people have this idea that if DESS is the knight, we're going to have to fight DESS, and then we're going to save her, and then we're going to redeem her, similarly to how we did with Flowey in Undertale. And I just don't see Toby doing that again. However, I am kind of stating this as my first point, because I don't really have any evidence other than vibes. And obviously, I don't know Toby Fox, so it would be quite egotistical for me to speak like I know his thought process. But so far, what we've seen from Deltarune, and this is obviously subject to change, but what we've seen from Deltarune that has been brought back from Undertale, whether that be mechanics or ideas or characters, they're always brought back with a twist. It's never a one-for-one rehashing of what we've seen before. And while this is just a guess, I think Toby is very cognizant of that, and I think that's something he's trying to be careful when he's doing that. And obviously there's some things that are going to be similar between the two games, that's just inevitable, but I think Toby's idea is that he's wanting to try to put a twist on ideas we've seen in Undertale by exploring them differently in Deltarune. Now, to speak on a bit more of a meta level here, I do feel like that lots of the stuff that we've seen from Undertale that have been brought over into Deltarune are a bit more lower stake. We've either gotten, like, gameplay gimmicks, or we've gotten characters who have been kind of reshaped to be put into Deltarune, but you could kind of replace them with other characters, not any character, but you could probably find a different character to replace them with, and the story would still work. You could find a different gameplay gimmick for a different part of the chapter, and it would still work. And I feel like a lot of the stuff that's going to tie into DESS is going to be very major to the ending. And again, obviously I don't know Toby Fox, but the idea that I've gotten from how he's talked about the story and the ending is that this was an idea he's been holding on to for multiple decades at this point, let's be honest. And I highly doubt that when he made Undertale, he made the ending very similar to what he was dreaming of for Deltarune, because Undertale was always made as a excuse to prepare for Deltarune. So I highly doubt he would basically have the same ending one for one across both games, for no other reason, if maybe just because he thought the idea for the ending was special and he wanted to save it for Deltarune, so he wouldn't just have the same ending in Undertale. I hope that makes sense. Now, obviously, this isn't necessarily an inherent part of the DESS Knight theory, but I feel like lots of people that I've seen have this idea that the whole thing will kind of end with something similar to the Azrael fight in Undertale, where we'll go up against her, and we'll have to, like, talk her down, and we'll redeem her, and all this stuff, and we'll have a happy ending, and I just don't think that's the case. I also think this kind of just comes back to a misunderstanding of Azrael and Flowey's character from Undertale, because I simultaneously see some people have this idea that Flowey and Azrael are two different they're two different complete beings that are just in a same, like, soul deal or whatever. And then I also see some people acting like they are the completely same person, when I feel like that's not really true either. For all intents and purposes, I think the only time we ever get to hear Asriel is in those tapes in the True Lab. Everything else is Flowey. Because the only reason Flowey really takes on the form of Asriel and acts like Asriel in that final fight is because he's trying to appeal to Kara and trying to convince them to stay. Even if Flowey kept resetting time so it didn't go beyond a certain point, that was still a lot of time Flowey was getting to experience, even if the quote-unquote timeline of the Underground never advanced by that many years. Flowey has probably lived for hundreds if not thousands just through reliving the same days over and over, making slightly different choices. And I'm sure you can look back 10, 20 years and you'll see a completely different person in the mirror, because time changes you. But like the mirror in the house says in Undertale, despite everything, it's still you. You're simultaneously a different person, but you are the same in a way. You've just changed and grown. So I guess my point here is that I think lots of people look at that fight as us trying to turn Flowey back into Asriel, when really, Asriel's been gone for a long time. All we're doing is giving Flowey a new change in perspective. And as we see with things that happen post-Pacifist Route, like the alarm clock dialogue and the anniversary stuff, we can see that Flowey is still kind of a bit cruel, maybe not in the same way, maybe not as maliciously, but he isn't like the goody two-shoes that Asriel was. He's still Flowey. He's just toned down a lot of his sadism, now that he kind of has that memory to hold on to, of how it felt to feel all that love all at once. So again, I don't really feel like we changed that much in terms of like changing one person into another. We just gave Flowey a crucial piece of perspective that he had been lacking for so long, and that's what allows him to live with the other monsters now. So tying this back into DESS, I feel like people have this idea that we're going to like save her and change her back into this version that we've heard of through the flashbacks to when things were good, the DESS we've heard about or read about in the sweepstakes. I feel like people have this idea that we're going to turn her back into an older version of DESS, when I don't really think that's how the series works. And I think in general, people are either forgetting or just straight up not noticing some of the differences that are being pointed out between Asriel's story in Undertale and DESS's story in Deltarune. Because, well, first of all, we haven't really had our Story of Undertale moment where we walk through New Home learning about the past in Deltarune. We haven't had that yet. But also, there's a very specific word, one very specific detail that is being pointed out that I think is very, very interesting and has some wonderfully dark implications. And, well, I haven't really been explaining why DESS is gone or why DESS is dead yet, so shall we? Now, something I find very, very interesting is how Asriel in Undertale, his plight is often accompanied by the idea of saving him. And this comes down to the whole, like, save mechanic in the final battle, the idea of, like, just saving in general being so tied to his character in terms of Flowey on, like, the literal level of saving the game, and of course, one of the final songs that plays as you fight Asriel and try to save his soul is called Save the World. And, like in many things in Undertale, it's kind of a double meaning, both in the sense of saving as a game mechanic and trying to save Flowey from the monster he's become. Now for DESS, this is quite a different story. And I feel like, again, first of all, I need to point out Deltarune isn't finished. Lots of the information we learn about Flowey/Asriel comes at the final act of the game, and we haven't experienced that yet, as I feel like Chapter 5 was kind of the end of Act 2, in a sense, of Deltarune. So I feel like we're going to get a lot more information in the upcoming chapters, but at that point we're just going to have to wait. So, using what we have now, the idea with DESS is a lot different to saving her. I feel like lots of people in the fandom have this idea that our goal is to save her, but every mention of her that has kind of been pointed out towards us is rather in the goal of finding her, or the pursuit of finding her, not saving her, specifically finding her, and I think that is incredibly interesting. Because the idea is, even if Asriel in Undertale is gone, you can still save Flowey. What is left of him. You can still take what is left of him and turn it into something better than the monster he became. You can still make it so Flowey can kind of integrate into society again via living with the rest of the monsters. You can still save him. But I think it's interesting that we're specifically looking at the idea of finding DESS. Well, as of now, all we know for a concrete fact is that DESS has gone missing. I feel like if DESS was missing and we had to go find and rescue her, it would still use that same save idea. We would have to save her from wherever she is, or bring her back home. But it's specifically find her. And just like we save Flowey in Undertale, we save him, we save Asriel, I think we're going to find DESS in Deltarune. The question is, will we like what we find? To put it another way, if we were to save DESS, part of that would be to find her. However, on the other end, to find DESS does not require that we save her. Cause if I could be a bit morbid here for a bit, we could find an unmarked grave in the middle of the forest, we could dig up a ripped up shirt with a bunch of stuff that would tell us that this is what used to be DESS, and in the literal sense of the word, we would have found her. Now, is that what we would have wanted? No, but we would have still found her. However, the idea that DESS is dead, on its own, is just a shocking twist. Doesn't have much substance. But looking at the themes of the game in tandem, I feel like is what takes this idea from, well, just a shocking twist, to something that actually would further the story. One overarching idea I've seen across Deltarune is the idea of not just holding on to the past, but holding on to it so tightly that you're ruining the present and future. One very obvious example of this is Tenna. Tenna is very stuck in the past, that is probably the most obvious part of his character. And something that I think is interesting is that Tenna can't really get a happy ending with us. Tenna can't get a happy ending with Chris, not in Castletown. In a way, Tenna has to move on, let go of the past, let go of Chris, to be happy again with Mettaton. Something to add on to this is that in Tenna's attempts to cling on to the past and try to reconnect with Chris, they get mutilated by the night. And it's only through Susie, because I'd like to remind you, it's not anything that Chris necessarily does that saves Tenna, it's the fact that Susie was able to find enough people to repair him that saves Tenna's life. And then from there, like I said, the only happy ending he gets is by moving on with Mettaton. And while her character arc isn't as over as Tenna's is, Carol is another example of holding on to the past. One example of a character trait we have from her is that she likes to just preserve and maintain things as they were. The example we get is that she would take the little crafts Noelle would make at school and keep them as pristine as she could, as untouched as she could. And we also see this with DESS's room. Instead of doing anything with it, changing anything, she is determined to keep everything exactly where it is, as if there's just some ideal world in her head where DESS will come right back through the door and continue living in that room as if nothing has changed. But this obviously isn't sustainable. We see directly through Noelle's behavior how this has hurt Noelle, and then also, with Rudy's Chekhov's plot illness finally kicking in, I feel like that once he's gone, that's not gonna get any better for Noelle. So I guess we just have this pattern of Carol is also pushing those around her away and hurting the people who still are there in an attempt to hold on to things that aren't here anymore. And to some extent, this idea also applies to Asgore. Though thankfully he does realize this at the end of Chapter 5, his obsession with finding more about the Dark Fountains and finding out who had taken DESS away was ultimately pushing his own family away from him and destroying, again, what was left. Both Carol and Asgore are so obsessed with the past that they're neglecting the family they still have left. And not only is that obviously hurting towards that family, but that same family had also lost people as well. They had lost those same people, but instead of having a shoulder to cry on who would understand the pain, they have to deal with their own problems by themselves, all while being abandoned by those who are supposed to be there for them. Now, while I could list more examples, I guess my general point is that this is definitely a clear and obvious theme in Deltarune, so I guess I have a problem with the idea that we could save DESS, because if DESS just comes back and things are normal, then, in a way, that justifies the negative behavior of these characters. If anything, holding on to the past was correct, it got you what you wanted. Even if it may have hurt a bit in the middle, it was ultimately the right thing to do. And I feel like that's both not a really good lesson to be telling, and not the direction that the story would go in. Or at least the direction the story would go in if it was written well. Chris is yet another character who is holding on very tightly to the past, And just like other characters, this is hurting them. It's obviously going to damage their relationship with Susie and Ralsei, or maybe not Ralsei as much since they seem to already have an idea of what's going on, but it will definitely hurt Susie when they realize that they've been playing both teams in a way. And I think part of this is kind of going to show that Chris does have a good way forward. They have a way forward that is healthy and happy with Susie and Noelle and Birdley and all those dumb idiots. But the thing is, since they're holding so tightly onto the past, I think that's why they're specifically in leagues with Carol, another character who is stuck in the past to her own detriment. So I feel like Chris is given an out in a way. They have this option of how to make things better by embracing the new, or at least doing what they can to evolve those older relationships like Noelle into something new and different. But they're not. They're stuck in the past, and I feel like their character arc will end with them having to make a choice one way or the other. And I don't see that making sense if DESS comes back and it kind of justifies all these bad things they were doing and they still get their happy ending moving on. It just wouldn't make sense. I feel like the story has to commit one way or the other, and I feel like the logical way it would have to go is that Chris lets go of the past, lets go of DESS, and moves on with Susie and Ralsei and Noelle, all that. Like, they give up the past to embrace what's here now. I guess I just mean that I feel like on a thematic level, there's no clean way for DESS to come back and for things to go back to normal. I feel like DESS has to be gone. There can't be a way to just bring her back. Looking back to Flowey for a bit, I think it's interesting that once he's able to end his character arc, and once he's able to reintegrate with other monsters, part of that process is letting go of some old relationships and trying to reforge other ones. We can see that they let go of Kara. They accept that while Kara was an important part of their life, they don't need them to live. They can live without Kara. That's not something they need to hold on to forever. They can still be their own person without Kara. And as we see, we don't really know if we know they're not taking like a child role for Toriel and Asgore, but Flowey still does care for Toriel as seen when he comforts her and wraps her in a blanket after the whole eggnog blackout incident. So I guess my point here is that I don't see a way that the story could keep its themes intact, keep the story it's trying to tell intact, and have DESS come back, to have us find DESS. I feel like I've kind of been talking about how I feel like this theory isn't necessarily, it doesn't really work with the DESS Knight, but I feel like I'm only talking about DESS Knight in, there's this image you've probably seen of the knight with its helmet off and it's just DESS underneath. That's the version of this theory that I don't think works or don't think makes sense. Something I do think would make sense is, again, this might be a bit morbid, I apologize. I think it would make sense that if the knight was literally the corpse of DESS being puppeted by some outside force, whether that be Friend, whether that be Eran, whether that be Gaster. And I guess my point is that DESS is gone. It's really just using her corpse as like an object to basically puppet it around so you have muscle. It's not really DESS at that point. Her person, her soul, her character is gone. All that's left is the physical object that is her body to be used for whatever purposes. I feel like, again, we're not going to save DESS. We're going to find her. We're going to realize that this knight is the body of DESS. The soul or character or person that was DESS was ripped out or killed or removed so the body could be used as an empty vessel, basically. But that raises the question, what happened to DESS's soul if it was ripped out to make space for whatever's using the body as the knight? Where am I? Hello? Anyone? Is anyone out there? Someone? Anyone? Can anyone hear me? It's dark. So dark here. Someone. Anyone. If you can hear me, say something. Please. That was me attempting to read out the unused text of Chapter 1. Now, for those who aren't aware, there is a script in the files of Deltarune titled Unused. In this script, there is text. Or, well, text in terms of, like, code, you get what I mean. But the thing is, every chapter adds on to it, or it feels like this is kind of telling its own little narrative. Every chapter has different text in this script, and it feels like it's building off of each other. And the thing is, most people know this is building towards something, or at least the people who are aware of it. While the text is never pulled directly in-game, In Chapter 2, in Spamton's shop, if you talk to him about fear, he pretty much almost one-for-one quotes the unused dialogue from the previous chapter, and if you're playing on the Japanese language, he does directly one-for-one take in that text. Now, again, he's not pulling the text from that actual script, it's just using identical words. Now, due to being the best character in the game, Spamton is tied into a lot of the deeper mysteries, and thus I feel like this is an introduction to this character for those who aren't going to dig through the files. And I think this character is DESS, or at least what is left of her. Like I mentioned in the previous section, I believe the knight, since it obviously is meant to allude to DESS in various ways, I feel like the knight is what is left of DESS's body, while the voice in the code is what's left of DESS's soul. And again, I am by no means the first person to bring up the idea that the voice in the code is DESS. I just think it's interesting the idea that the text is called unused, and from a coding perspective, it is unused, but the script does have a use. It's for us. Because, as Toby showed us back in back in Undertale, Toby hid a message in the game files basically saying to not leak a bunch of stuff and to data mine through things. People didn't do that, so Toby responded, and he said, I will follow you to the he's like, I understand, I will follow you to the absolute. And that message was replaced with the sound of Gaster laughing. Now, ominous sound effects aside, I feel like this character is Toby basically saying that, okay, well, if you guys are going to be so determined to data mine my games, I'm going to do something cool with it. Because, again, if the text was really unused, it wouldn't be the way it is. It's actively calling attention to itself. Because I feel like actual unused code wouldn't be updating every new release of the game or every new update of the game. It wouldn't be calling attention to itself by calling itself unused in capital letters. I feel like this script is being used. It's not being used in the code of the game itself. It's being used for us to dig into. And I guess my point here is that I feel like that is kind of in a way proving its own relevance. And to break the fourth wall for a moment, it was at this moment of writing the script that I came to a cool little realization that may be me just being schizophrenic, but we will see. In Undertale and Deltarune, there are a lot of words with double meanings. And usually one of those is its more kind of like literal meaning, while one is more of a pun meaning. The most obvious example I can think of is determination. Obviously it's determination in the literal word of being determined to do something, but in the context of the game, determination is also determination. Literally being unable to die, or being able to undo your own death. Termination, you're determinating, or whatever. I hope I'm explaining that well. But I came to a realization, what if unused is the same sort of deal? Because under this theory I'm trying to put together of DESS being basically split in a way where her body became the knight, and then her soul is lost in the code, what if whatever turned her body into that didn't have a use for DESS's soul? It threw her away into the depths of the code, or the depths as they're probably referred to in universe, quite literally making her unused. Now, I am very aware I could definitely be overthinking things way too much, but if that is the joke they're trying to make there, I would be incredibly proud of myself for figuring that out on my own, because knowing my luck, someone else has probably already come to that conclusion, but I came to it independently, so I'm taking credit. Jokes aside, I do think DESS is the voice in the code, but in a way, that doesn't really change much, now does it? Because, functionally, even if she's still there in the code, functionally she's dead. She is not reachable by anyone in the, base plane of Deltarune in Hometown. No one's ever going to be able to reach her there. That would involve you having to, break out of the boundaries of Hometown and somehow get into the depths. Oh. Maybe we will find her alive. That's my theory. On the normal route, we're going to destroy the knight, and in a way, that will be putting DESS's body to rest, basically giving it the proper burial it deserves. And on a story level, we'll move on, we'll accept that DESS is gone, and we'll go forward growing. However, on the weird route, we're going to find DESS, and maybe we don't care about whatever her body is doing, we've already abandoned the world in Hometown, but we'll find the soul of DESS, we'll find the person that is DESS deep in the depths of the code of the game. But at that point, will it even matter? If Noelle is even still with us, if we haven't used her up yet, will she even be able to recognize the person in front of her, whatever new form she has now? Will it even matter if they can recognize each other? I don't know. but if this is the direction the game is going in, I am very interested to see what happens. With that being said, thank you for watching. I'd like to apologize if the editing on this video isn't too grand or in-depth. I'm still recovering from a fever, and just some other general life stuff that you guys don't care or need to know about. So, I feel like I've just been struggling to even get a video together, let alone a good one, and I really tried to put more effort into like the writing on this one because I knew I wasn't gonna be able to put too much together editing-wise. So, yeah, I hope that you guys enjoy this video regardless of the editing quality. I hope my writing was strong enough to make up for it. On top of that, I have this anxiety around making bigger videos or putting more effort into videos, because historically, every time I've done that, the video has underperformed, and it's very frustrating. So I figured instead of doing a really big video or a really small video, I would just try to do more of a medium video, and that was what this was. And I really did try to put a lot of effort into it, just not so much that when it inevitably underperforms, I'll feel terrible and want to hurt myself again. But again, that's stuff you guys don't need to know about. I'm just trying to explain things because I feel like I need to justify this video's existence. And I guess ultimately, I just hope this video was enjoyable. Because again, I've been having a hard time putting anything together, and I worry that whatever I do put together isn't going to be of quality. So I just hope this was a nice watch, or that you at least enjoyed it, or at least got you thinking, even if you disagree with what I said. And I'm not like completely, like I do believe this is sort of the direction the story will go in, but if it doesn't, I'm completely okay to see what else happens. And I just thought, you know, that's the thing about theories, is that there's a good chance that whatever you'll say will immediately become outdated, so at least try to have fun with it. And I do have other ideas for Deltarune videos I'd like to make. However, I do feel like I'm starting to get a little burnt out on video essays right now, and with the diminishing returns I'm getting, it's a little harder to justify it to myself, if that makes sense, when I could be doing other things I would be finding it more entertaining. So if this video gets, like, if it gets something crazy good, ridiculous, like 20,000 views, I'll make sure to start working on some more Deltarune video essays. But otherwise, I have some other ideas for videos I'd like to make, and since Tarnished Edition just came out finally, I was thinking about doing some sort of long, sort of Let's Play sort of deal, or not Let's Play, but like a really long, big video, just me playing through Elden Ring, but I'll see about that. Depending on how this video is received, I have a few options. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Either way, thank you once again for your time. I really appreciate that you were willing to sit down and give my video a chance, and I hope you have a good day. With all that being said, hopefully I'll see you soon. Good night.